Hello, and welcome back to the Steps of Writing Like a Pro with me, Mary Harelkin Bishop. Today, we are going to talk about step 3. We talked about step 1, which is ideas, where we get our ideas, how we keep our ideas. We talked about step 2 with 2 videos. The first one was talking about thinking and daydreaming and just having fun with your story and creating it. And then the second one was expanding, and I showed you how I really have to spend a lot of time thinking and daydreaming and filling in a character web like this about my characters and thinking about my plot. And step 3 is continuing on that same line. It's still about planning. So do you notice that I actually spend a lot of time in my head, with my stories in my head, before I actually write anything down? I do. And the reason for that is that if I can do all of this planning ahead of time, and step 3 that we're going to talk about, all of this planning too, then when I actually go to sit down and write my story, it just flows out of my head and I just write and write and write. And that's when I have my very best writing experience, is when I'm just letting things flow out of my head. So I don't have to stop and have to fix any of these things or think about any of these things because I've done it already. The other thing that's good for me is if I do this and do my step 2, thinking and daydreaming, and step 3, planning, then I don't get writer's block hardly at all, like almost never, because I've already done all the work ahead of time. So in the planning stage, we're still continuing with the thinking and daydreaming, but now we're trying to put things down concretely so we know what's going to happen. And so some of the things that I think about and have to really decide about, we talked about there is, how do I get Andrea into the past in the 1920s? So I had to think about a lot of different ideas and finally decided that she would hit her head. And that worked really well for Tunnels of Time. But when I came time to write Tunnels of Terror, that was a problem for me to take both her and Tony back to the past because the same thing couldn't happen again. So that's something that I was thinking about for another book. I had to also think about that disguise. And so thinking about what she was wearing way at the beginning helped me with knowing what her disguise would look like. So there's all kinds of things you have to think about. So really quickly, at the beginning of starting a new book, as I'm thinking and daydreaming, I actually start to write an outline. And for me, what works best is actually to do a chapter by chapter outline. And at the same time, I'm thinking about, how is my story going to begin? How is my story going to end? And I'm thinking about all the things in the middle too. I don't worry a lot about the middle, except to know where my general story is going, but I think a lot about how to start it so that it's exciting for my reader and grabs the attention, and thinking about the ending too, so that I know that I have tied up all of my loose ends in my story and have come up with a really satisfying way to end my story. So I actually don't start writing my story until I know exactly how it's going to start, almost down to the first sentence. And sometimes I know exactly how that first sentence is going to be, and that first scene and what it's going to look like. And the same with the ending. I know exactly how it's going to end, how I'm going to tie everything up. So as I said, I do plan my story very carefully. I make an outline. And what I have to show you today is the middle page of a 3-page outline that I did for Tunnels of Time way back when. And at the top there, you can see it says Chapter 4, Job to Be, Run to Various Places in the Tunnels. And it says M and V, and we know that V is Vance. And M, as I told you in the earlier video, Andrea was going to be Melissa, but I changed her name. That happens to me a lot. I have to think about my names and can't actually write my story until I have the perfect name for my character. So that's just one example there. And I know you're looking at that going, my gosh, can she read that? Yes, this particular outline, sometimes I do my very best thinking in the middle of the night. And this literally was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and I said, oh, I'd better write this down. And so I sat almost in the dark, half asleep, and scribbled this, as you can see scribbling. But I can read it. Am I worried about my spelling here? No. Am I worried about making sentences? No, I'm just making jot notes about my story. We can worry about those kinds of things later. Another one I wanted to show you as well is sometimes I do a visual. And so this one is for a story, is for what turned out to be Seeds of Hope, and I'll show you that book in a minute. But what I had to do was actually draw where the farm was in relation to the town, where the road was, where the train went, because the train played a really important part in part of the story, how far they were from town, so I knew if Danny and his sister could actually bike to town, so it's a kilometer, that's not too far, where the fields were that Dad and Grandpa were working in, and where the farmhouse was and the other things that were on the farm. And so that helps me if I have a little picture. Now, is that a really fabulous picture? No, it is not, but it helps my writer brain when I'm writing. The other thing I wanted to show you too, to do with Seeds of Hope, is here's the plan that I had for Seeds of Hope. Just so you can see, I actually do this. And originally, I was going to call the story A Surprise for Janie, and changed it. I changed names in there. You can see the main character was going to be Trent for a while, and then I finally changed his name to Danny. The things that were going to happen in the story. And so there's another example of the planning and the outline that I do for my stories. So I hope that you will take some time to actually outline and plan your story. If you start with a short story, it would be fairly simple to do a beginning, a middle, and an end, and really think about your characters and the things that you need to happen, but then how are you going to plan to start that story? So next time, we'll talk about step 4. So please keep reading, keep writing, and I'll talk to you again soon.